I remember the day like it was yesterday, though every time I think about it now, I feel a strange mixture of disbelief, sadness, and a little bit of shame. I never imagined that my own son and his wife could behave the way they did, right there in front of all our family and friends, on what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. But I suppose life has a way of showing you people's true colors, often at the most inconvenient moments. It all started a few months before the wedding. I had been widowed for almost 5 years after losing my first husband, David. He was a good man, gentle, steady, someone who made life simple and comfortable. Losing him was like losing a part of myself. The first 2 years were unbearable. I didn't think I would ever feel joy again, or want to, for that matter. My children, my son, Daniel, and my daughter, Lily, tried to be supportive, but grief is such a lonely journey, even with people around you. Then, slowly, life started to feel a little lighter. I met Michael at a small community gathering. He was a widower himself, a kind, quiet man with soft eyes and a patient smile. There was nothing dramatic about it. No fireworks or sudden confessions. Just long talks over coffee, walks in the park, and the sense that I could finally breathe again without feeling guilty. I was nervous about telling my children. I had imagined that they would be happy for me, at least in a polite, restrained way. But deep down, I feared they wouldn't be. My son, Daniel, especially, has always been a little critical. He's smart, careful, very particular about appearances, and sometimes I think he judges before he understands. His wife, Claire, is similar, sophisticated, sharp-tongued, and confident in her opinions, which she does not hesitate to share. I hoped they would be civil at least, even if they didn't like Michael. When I finally told them, their reactions were lukewarm, at best. Daniel raised his eyebrows, stared at me for a long moment, and said, "Mom, you really think this is the right time?" Claire added, almost laughing, "Well, he seems nice enough, I guess. But I don't know. Are you sure he's really compatible with you?" It wasn't cruel, not exactly, but the tone was sharp enough that it stung. I tried to brush it off, telling myself they were just concerned about me. I wanted to believe they would come around. Planning the wedding itself was simple. Michael didn't want anything extravagant. We had a small ceremony in a quiet hall, just family and close friends. I thought it would be intimate, a day to celebrate a new chapter quietly and peacefully. But as soon as Daniel and Claire arrived, the tension was palpable. I noticed the small smirks, the whispered comments they shared while looking at Michael. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe they were just joking, but by the time the reception began, it was impossible to ignore. Claire, leaning close to Daniel, said something under her breath that made them both giggle. Daniel glanced at Michael, rolled his eyes, and whispered something that made Claire laugh so loudly that several people turned to see what was so funny. I could feel my cheeks burn with embarrassment. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to tell them to stop, right there in front of everyone. But something inside me froze. I didn't want to ruin the day, didn't want to make it about conflict. I looked at Michael, hoping he hadn't noticed. He smiled politely, nodded to me, and said quietly, "It's okay. I don't mind." But I could see the hurt in his eyes. Michael has always been patient, gentle. He would never say anything to hurt anyone intentionally, but I knew he felt it. I felt it too. Every whispered comment, every glance, every smirk was like a small, invisible blade. And I couldn't believe my own children could act this way, could be so openly disrespectful towards the man I had chosen to love again. By the time the cake was brought out, the laughter and teasing had become more direct. Claire leaned over to Daniel and said something loud enough that half the table could hear. "Honestly, Mom, he's sweet, but he's not really your type, is he? I mean, he's older. He doesn't even seem that interesting." Daniel laughed. "Yeah, Mom, I mean, you could do better, right?" My heart sank. The room went quiet for a moment. Some of our friends shifted uncomfortably. I wanted to shout, to defend Michael, but again, my voice caught in my throat. I didn't want to make a scene. I tried to smile. Michael, ever composed, took a deep breath and said softly, "I'm happy to be here. Truly, that's all that matters." His eyes met mine, and in that moment, I realized just how strong he really is. He could have walked away, embarrassed, hurt, but he chose to stay, to honor me. And the day, even though my own son and daughter-in-law had mocked him in front of everyone, after the reception, when the guests had left, I finally broke down in tears. Michael held me, whispered that it wasn't my fault, that people's pettiness sometimes comes out when they feel insecure or threatened. And I wanted to believe that. I wanted to tell myself that Daniel and Claire's behavior was just immaturity, a failure to understand, not a betrayal. But part of me couldn't ignore the deep hurt. It wasn't just the embarrassment. It was the realization that my children, people I had loved and nurtured my entire life, had chosen a moment that should have been about love and celebration to ridicule someone who had given me kindness, respect, and companionship. And it cut me in a way I didn't expect. I had thought that grief and loss were the hardest things I'd face after David died. But perhaps the hardest was seeing your own child dismiss the happiness of the person who chose to stand by you when life gave you a second chance. I spent the next few days in a kind of stunned silence, trying to process what had happened. I couldn't bring myself to confront them directly. I just waited. And then, one evening, a call came that changed everything. It was a mutual friend, someone who had been at the reception, someone I trusted. She said she had seen something that explained, well, everything. Something about Claire and Daniel that I hadn't known. Something that completely changed my understanding of their behavior that night. I remember standing in the kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, feeling a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Relief, because finally, there was a reason behind the cruelty, something that wasn't just petty arrogance. Disbelief, because the truth was stranger and more painful than I could have imagined. And that really is where my story begins. The night of my wedding, the humiliation, the whispered mockery, none of it made sense until this truth came to light. Until I understood why my own son and his wife had acted so cruelly. Right when I was finally allowing myself to be happy again, the discovery wasn't just shocking. It made me question everything I thought I knew about the people I had raised, about trust, about family. And it forced me to make choices I never thought I would have to make. Choices about love, about respect, and about the kind of life I wanted to live going forward. I can't tell you yet what that truth is, because it's a story that unfolds slowly, painfully, with many twists. But I can tell you this, it changed my life. It tested my marriage, my children, and most of all, my sense of what it means to be a mother. When Michael and I talk about that day now, we don't focus on the hurt. We focus on the fact that we stood together, quietly, without confrontation, without bitterness in our hearts. Because in that moment, I realized something important. Love isn't about perfection, and family isn't always what you hope it will be. But honesty, courage, and the willingness to stand by the people who truly care for you. That's what matters. I still remember walking into the empty hall the next morning. The decorations were gone, the chairs stacked, the remnants of the celebration scattered across the floor. And I realized I had survived something much more difficult than wedding jitters or family disagreements. I had survived the shock of seeing my children's unkindness in full display, and I had seen the quiet strength of the man who had chosen me despite it. And just like that, I knew that the story wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. There were questions that needed answers, secrets that had to be uncovered, and lessons about forgiveness, trust, and boundaries that I had to learn the hard way. I don't know if I could have imagined, even in my wildest dreams, the way this would unfold. But I do know one thing. Sometimes, the truth doesn't come out in a whisper or in a polite conversation. Sometimes it comes crashing in, messy and uninvited, and it changes everything. And that is exactly what happened after my wedding, when my son and his wife mocked the man I had chosen to share my life with, and the truth came out in a way I never expected. After that day, life didn't return to normal immediately. In fact, for weeks, I felt like I was walking through a fog. Every memory of the wedding came back to me in sharp, jagged flashes. Claire's laughter, Daniel's smirk, the polite smiles of friends who didn't know how to react, Michael's quiet composure beside me. It was all there, lingering in the corners of my mind. I found myself replaying every moment, wondering if I could have done something differently, if I should have spoken up, if I had somehow failed Michael by letting it happen. Michael, of course, reassured me, as he always did. He had this calm way of looking at life, this quiet steadiness that made you believe everything would be okay, even when it clearly wasn't. We can't control how other people behave, he told me one evening, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. All we can do is decide how we respond. I nodded, trying to believe it. And I wanted to, but it was hard. It was so hard to reconcile the image I had of my children, the little boy I had held in my arms when he was sick, the girl I had helped braid her hair before school, with the people who had openly mocked the man I loved during those weeks. I tried to focus on the small, everyday routines that had once given me comfort. I started waking up earlier in the mornings, making tea for myself and Michael, tending to the small garden in our backyard. These moments felt grounding, almost normal, but the undercurrent of unease never fully left. I found myself dreading phone calls, avoiding messages, and thinking twice before answering the door. My children called, of course. Daniel's voice over the phone was polite, careful even, but it lacked warmth. Claire's voice sounded almost rehearsed, sweet and pleasant in a way that made me suspicious. I answered when I could, but every conversation left me tired, emotionally drained. It was during this time that the truth began to unravel slowly, piece by piece. Our mutual friend, the one who had called me after the wedding, became a lifeline. She started sharing observations and information she had gathered quietly, almost like a detective piecing together a puzzle. She told me about small things she had noticed over the past year, Daniel and Claire visiting places I didn't know about. Conversations that seemed odd in retrospect. Subtle manipulations aimed at controlling my perception of Michael. At first, I didn't want to believe it. Part of me clung to the hope that maybe I had just been imagining the cruelty, that maybe my children were simply insensitive or awkward. But the more details emerged, the more it became impossible to ignore. It was clear that there was more at play than simple disapproval. There were intentions behind their behavior, carefully hidden until the wedding revealed them, intentionally cruel, and aimed directly at undermining Michael and my happiness. During this time, I also started thinking back over the years, remembering moments I had dismissed at the time. Small remarks, subtle criticisms, moments when Daniel and Claire had seemed distant or judgmental about my choices, especially after David died. I had always chalked it up to concern or personality quirks, but now, in light of what I was learning, I began to see the pattern. There had been a quiet, steady effort to isolate me emotionally, to test my choices, and to assert control over my life in ways I hadn't noticed because I trusted them so completely. The shock of this realization was almost physical. I found myself crying quietly in the evenings, holding Michael's hand, feeling both grateful and guilty. Grateful that he had been by my side, understanding, patient, and strong, and guilty that I had allowed my own children's actions to hurt us so deeply. I wondered if I had failed Michael somehow, if I had been too naive, too trusting, too eager to believe the best in everyone. Michael never let me dwell on guilt for long. He would gently redirect the conversation, reminding me that their actions reflected on them, not on me, and certainly not on our marriage. The past is what it is, he would say, and it doesn't have to define our future. Those words became a quiet mantra I repeated to myself. But the truth remained. I needed to understand exactly what had happened and why before I could truly move forward. One evening, about a month after the wedding, I decided to visit Daniel and Claire. I told myself it was to try to have a calm conversation, to bridge the gap that had formed so quickly. But really, I think I was hoping to find answers. I wanted to see in their eyes the reasons behind their behavior, to hear an explanation that would make sense, that would allow me to believe they hadn't been intentionally cruel. I remember standing in front of their door, hesitating, my hand hovering over the doorknob. The hallway smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and something floral, a scent I had come to associate with their house over the years. When they opened the door, their smiles were immediate, warm, rehearsed, and it set off an instinct in me, a warning that something wasn't right. I stepped inside, trying to keep my emotions in check, feeling Michael's quiet strength in the back of my mind as I crossed the threshold. We sat in their living room, the conversation starting awkwardly. Daniel asked how we were. Claire nodded and asked after the garden, small talk that felt polished, smooth, but somehow hollow. And then, slowly, I began to ask the questions that had been burning in my mind. I asked about the wedding, about their laughter, about the things they had whispered and joked about right in front of Michael. I asked why they had behaved the way they did, why they had chosen to mock the man I had chosen to love again. At first, they deflected. Daniel shifted in his chair. Claire smiled nervously, both trying to make it seem like it had all been a misunderstanding, an accident, something unintentional. But as I pressed gently, calmly, refusing to be swayed by their polite avoidance, cracks began to show. Daniel's jaw tightened, Claire's voice faltered, and then, finally, the truth began to spill out, not all at once, but in pieces. Fragments that slowly painted a picture of manipulation, jealousy, and control. I learned that their mockery had been planned. They had been threatened by the idea of me being happy with someone new, by the idea of Michael entering our family and shifting the balance they had been accustomed to. There had been conversations, deliberate strategies to unsettle me, to test Michael, to see if he would falter. It was cruel, yes, but it was also revealing. It showed me the depths of their insecurities, the way fear and pride could turn into something that hurt the people they claimed to love. Hearing this, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sorrow, relief, and a kind of sad clarity. It explained so much. It explained the laughter, the whispers, the judgment. And while it didn't erase the hurt, it gave me perspective. I realized that this wasn't about me failing as a mother or about Michael being weak. It was about them confronting a reality they weren't prepared to accept, that my happiness didn't belong to them to control. Over the following weeks, I spent a lot of time reflecting. I spent quiet mornings in the garden with Michael, afternoons walking through the park, evenings sitting at the kitchen table talking about life and love. These small routines became my anchor, and slowly, I began to see a path forward, not one that ignored what had happened, but one that allowed me to process it without letting it define the rest of my life. I also began to set boundaries, gently at first, but with growing confidence. I realized that love, respect, and happiness were not negotiable, even with family. I had to protect my marriage, my peace, and my dignity. It was uncomfortable at first, because it went against years of habit, against a lifetime of trying to keep everyone happy. But Michael's quiet support, his calm reassurance that we were a team, made it possible. And through all of this, I started noticing changes in myself. I noticed a quiet strength forming, a resilience I hadn't expected. I realized that the betrayal, the humiliation, and the manipulations had shown me not only the true nature of my children's behavior, but also the depth of my own capacity to endure, to forgive, if I chose, and to protect what mattered most. The backstory of those months, the days leading up to the wedding, the weeks following it, became more than just memories. They became lessons, small pieces of a larger journey that would teach me about honesty, courage, and the sometimes painful truth that love doesn't always come from where you expect it. And hurt doesn't always come from strangers, it often comes from those closest to us. By the time I began to feel steady again, I understood that what I had experienced was not just a test of my relationship with Michael, but a test of my own heart, my priorities, and my strength. And while the road ahead was uncertain, I also knew that the truth, the one that had finally come to light, would guide me, not just in dealing with my children, but in learning how to navigate family, love, and life with eyes wide open. The tension didn't ease after those conversations. In fact, it grew, but in subtle, almost invisible ways. Daniel and Claire, now aware that I knew a part of their plan, began a quiet campaign of testing me in other areas of my life. They didn't mock Michael openly anymore, at least not in front of me, but there was always this undercurrent, a lingering edge in their words, a subtle judgment in their tone. Every interaction became a delicate balance, a game of emotional patience, and I had to learn it quickly. I started noticing small manipulations that I had never seen before or perhaps had ignored. Invitations that never came, casual remarks that undermined my confidence, questions designed to make me second-guess myself. Claire would comment on my clothing, my home, my way of hosting, always in a tone so sweet that if you weren't paying attention, it sounded complimentary. Daniel would make offhand remarks about my decisions, my spending, my social life, the way I prioritized my time with Michael, always suggesting that I was being careless or naive. It was exhausting. But over time, I became adept at spotting the patterns. I realized that Michael's presence had shifted something fundamental in the family dynamic. I was no longer the widow, the vulnerable woman they thought they could influence and control. With Michael, I was someone with a partner who supported me, someone who had my back, someone whose respect and loyalty were unwavering. And that realization, while comforting, seemed to provoke them even more. I remember one afternoon in particular. We were having tea in my kitchen, Michael quietly reading a newspaper at the table while I prepared sandwiches. Daniel had come by, ostensibly to drop off some papers, but the tension was immediate. Claire lingered behind him, arms crossed, eyes sharp. At first, their conversation was normal, polite, almost superficial. But then, Daniel casually mentioned something about our wedding photographer, making a remark that implied Michael had only been a filler, someone who happened to be convenient, someone not truly deserving of attention. It was a small comment, almost dismissible if you didn't know the history, but I felt it like a weight in my chest. Michael, as always, didn't react outwardly. He simply smiled politely, said, "I'm glad I could help," and returned his attention to the newspaper. But I could see the tension in his shoulders, the quiet tightening around his jaw. I wanted to defend him, to lash out, but instead, I chose to remain calm. I realized that reacting would give them the satisfaction they were seeking. Over the next few weeks, the behavior continued, in different forms. There were subtle digs at Michael during family dinners, comparisons that suggested he was inadequate, remarks about how I had changed since meeting him, and even veiled comments about my age and lifestyle. At first, I felt hurt, vulnerable, and angry. I questioned myself constantly. Was I overreacting? Was I imagining things? But then, I started keeping notes, writing down incidents, conversations, and the tone of each exchange. Seeing it all in black and white made it undeniable. There was a clear pattern of psychological manipulation, and it was directed at both Michael and me. This slow burn conflict began to weigh on me. I found myself dreading family gatherings, postponing visits, and withdrawing in subtle ways to protect my emotional well-being. Michael noticed, of course, and would gently encourage me to speak up, to set boundaries. He reminded me that it wasn't wrong to prioritize our peace, even if it meant creating distance from my own children temporarily. But still, I hesitated. There's a certain societal expectation that mothers will endure, forgive, and absorb hurt without complaint. I struggled against that instinct. I didn't want to alienate my children completely, but I also couldn't continue letting them erode my sense of self and the happiness I had found with Michael. And then came the manipulations that cut deeper. Claire began sending messages that were carefully constructed to create doubt in my mind. Questions about Michael's intentions, suggestions that he might not truly care, and subtle hints that he was somehow taking advantage of me financially. Daniel, in turn, would drop off helpful advice in person, framing it as concern, but always with the underlying tone of judgment and insinuation. I felt trapped in a web I hadn't realized existed. The people I loved most, the ones I had trusted implicitly, were now trying to control my life, to undermine the happiness I had fought so hard to reclaim. It was during this time that I noticed a change in Michael as well. At first, he remained his calm, patient self, but even he, as composed as he was, began to carry a quiet weight. I could see it in his eyes, the small lines of worry around his mouth, the way he sometimes paused before speaking, as if anticipating a subtle attack from my children. It broke my heart, because he had done nothing wrong, yet he was being tested by people who should have celebrated him. I realized then that this slow burn conflict was not just emotional. It was insidious, wearing down our relationship piece by piece. If we let it, I began to strategize. I had to approach this carefully, without creating open conflict, but also without allowing myself or Michael to be diminished any longer. I started by reinforcing small boundaries. Invitations were now extended on my terms, visits scheduled when I felt prepared, and conversations carefully moderated. I refused to be cornered into topics that led to criticism. At first, it felt almost tactical, like navigating a minefield, but slowly, it became a rhythm. Meanwhile, I also started to observe more carefully. I watched Daniel and Claire's interactions, noticing the subtle alliances they formed with other family members, the way they tried to influence opinions, and the way they framed narratives about me and Michael. It was revealing, painful, but necessary. I began to understand that their actions weren't just about one moment, the wedding, or even about me. It was about control over family perception, control over my autonomy, control over the narrative of our lives. One particularly tense evening stands out in my memory. Daniel and Claire came over, ostensibly to discuss holiday plans. From the moment they arrived, the atmosphere was charged. Claire made pointed comments about my kitchen setup, Daniel remarked on the timing of my appointments with Michael, and there were subtle jabs about my social life. Michael, patient as always, answered calmly, keeping his voice low and measured. I realized at that moment that we were no longer just defending ourselves individually, we were defending each other. And that was a turning point. It was also around this time that more pieces of the puzzle began to emerge. Our mutual friend, the one who had first called after the wedding, continued to share insights she had gathered discreetly. She told me about financial maneuvers, subtle attempts to influence decisions at work, and even conversations Daniel and Claire had with distant relatives, all aimed at undermining Michael's reputation and credibility. The web of manipulation was broader than I had imagined, and the depth of their planning became almost frightening. Yet, amidst all this, I noticed something profound about myself. I was no longer the passive, grieving widow who had feared confrontation. I was alert, cautious, strategic, and deeply protective of the life I had chosen with Michael. Every act of subtle aggression from my children became an opportunity to reinforce boundaries, to clarify my priorities, and to assert, gently but firmly, that our happiness was not up for debate or ridicule. And Michael, he remained my anchor. He never wavered in his support, never questioned my decisions, and never allowed the bitterness of the situation to consume him. His quiet strength became the framework upon which I rebuilt my confidence, and together, we navigated a path through the slow burn tension that could have easily destroyed us. This period of conflict, subtle as it was, taught me lessons that I carry with me even now. I learned that betrayal doesn't always come as a dramatic reveal. It often creeps in quietly through whispers, smiles, and carefully constructed words. I learned that love requires patience, vigilance, and the courage to protect what is truly yours. And most importantly, I learned that family, while precious, is not always the safe harbor we imagine it to be. As the months passed, I realized that we were approaching a point of reckoning. The slow burn tension had reached a stage where further inaction could no longer be tolerated. There were truths that needed to be confronted, manipulations that needed to be exposed, and boundaries that needed to be enforced clearly and permanently. And it was in that quiet preparation, that careful observation, that I found both dread and anticipation, the knowledge that the storm was coming, but also the readiness to face it. The rising conflict had shaped us, strengthened us, and prepared us for the moments when the full truth would finally emerge. And though I did not yet know all the details, I could feel, deep in my bones, that the revelation waiting just ahead would not just confirm our suspicions, it would change the entire landscape of our family forever. It happened on a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky presses down, gray and heavy, and everything feels sharper because of the cold and the damp. Michael and I had just returned from the grocery store, bags in hand, when I noticed a small envelope on the doorstep. It was plain, no markings, and slightly wet from the rain. My first thought was that it was probably some junk mail, a bill, or a note from a neighbor. But something made me pause, something in the way it was tucked into the corner, as if deliberately placed so only I would see it. I brought it inside and carefully opened it. Inside were photographs of Daniel and Claire, some recent, some a little older, all taken without their knowledge. I stared at the images, feeling my heart pound. There they were, in various locations, speaking to people I didn't recognize, exchanging envelopes, leaning in close and whispering. My stomach churned as I flipped through each photo, noticing subtle details I had never paid attention to before: the gestures, the expressions, the way Claire's hand would rest on Daniel's arm when they spoke to certain people. And then there were the receipts, bank statements and notes meticulously documented, showing small transfers of money, small favors, and clear attempts to interfere in Michael's professional life. I felt a wave of disbelief, followed by a quiet, deep anger. All the subtle manipulations, the smirks, the whispers, the criticisms, they were part of a much larger plan. This was not random cruelty or thoughtless immaturity. This was deliberate. They had been working behind the scenes for months, maybe even years, to control, undermine, and influence my life, and Michael's presence in it. My children, my son and his wife, were orchestrating an elaborate attempt to destabilize my second chance at happiness. I showed the materials to Michael, and he took them with a steady hand, examining each piece carefully. His face remained calm, though I could see the tightness in his jaw. He didn't speak immediately. He just placed the photographs and papers on the kitchen table, organized them methodically, and finally said, They've been planning this longer than we realized. They wanted to make sure you would doubt me, doubt us, doubt yourself." It was both shocking and, in a strange way, clarifying. Suddenly, everything made sense. The laughter at the wedding, the whispered comments, the subtle digs at our home, our routines, even my choices, it was all part of this plan. They hadn't just mocked Michael. They had tested him, pushed boundaries, and tried to erode the foundation of our life together before it could solidify. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, yes. Betrayal, yes. But also a kind of clarity. For so long, I had questioned myself, wondering if I had been overreacting, if I had misinterpreted their behavior. Now, the truth was undeniable. They had acted deliberately, strategically, and with the intent to harm the life I was building with Michael. We spent hours going over the evidence, piece by piece. Michael suggested we document everything thoroughly, in case it escalated further. I agreed. It felt surreal, like stepping into a reality I hadn't imagined, a side of my own children I had never truly known. And yet, beneath the shock, there was also a sense of empowerment. Now that the truth was in front of me, I could finally act with clarity, rather than doubt and fear. The confrontation was inevitable. I arranged to meet Daniel and Claire, not at their home, not in a neutral place, but at my own living room. It was my territory, my rules, and I wanted them to understand that. Michael stood beside me, quiet, patient, and strong. I felt a surge of courage I hadn't realized I possessed. When they arrived, the tension was palpable. Daniel and Claire smiled, politely at first, but there was an edge to it, a nervousness that hadn't been there before. I let them settle, allowed them to think they were still in control of the narrative, and then began to speak. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse loudly. I spoke calmly, steadily, detailing what I had learned, what had been discovered through the photographs, the bank statements, the notes. Their reactions were immediate and telling. Daniel's face flushed, Claire's smile faltered, and both exchanged quick, nervous glances. There were half-formed excuses, denials that sounded weak, attempts to shift blame, but Michael remained silent, simply observing, his presence amplifying the weight of the truth. He didn't need to argue. His quiet confidence, his calm attention, made it clear that this was not about anger, it was about accountability. As I laid everything out, I noticed a subtle shift. The control they thought they had, the smirks, the whispered manipulations, the subtle power plays evaporated under the weight of evidence. I could see the recognition in their eyes, the realization that their careful planning had been exposed, and that I was no longer the vulnerable target they could influence. Then came the most difficult part, the emotional confrontation. I asked them why. Why they had done this. Why they had tried to mock and undermine Michael. Why they had tried to control my life, and why they had betrayed the trust I had given them as their mother. There was silence at first. Then Claire spoke, her voice shaking, admitting a mix of jealousy, fear, and a desire to maintain control. Daniel followed, attempting to rationalize their actions as concern for me, but the sincerity was absent. The truth had been revealed, and their excuses felt hollow in the face of the evidence. Hearing them speak, seeing the weight of exposure press on them, was surreal. The power dynamics had shifted completely. I no longer felt hurt and powerless. I felt calm, resolute, and in control. The humiliation of the wedding, the whispers, the laughter, they were all behind me now. I could see the truth laid bare, and with it, I could reclaim the dignity and peace that had been threatened. Michael finally spoke, his voice steady but firm. He didn't shout. He didn't attack. He simply said, "We are not here to punish you, but we will not allow manipulation, deceit, or cruelty to affect our life. The choices you make now will define the boundaries of our relationship going forward." It was simple, calm, and incredibly powerful. In that moment, I realized something important. The revelation of the truth didn't just expose Daniel and Claire's actions. It revealed my own strength, my ability to protect my happiness, and my capacity to act decisively when necessary. The betrayal had been painful, but the clarity it brought was invaluable. After the confrontation, there was silence. They left my house eventually, quiet and subdued. I knew things would never be the same, and that was okay. What mattered was that the truth had come out, and Michael and I could now move forward with eyes wide open, without the weight of deception looming over us. That day, I understood that life sometimes delivers shocking truths at the moments we least expect. But those truths, painful as they may be, are also the very things that allow us to protect what is real, meaningful, and lasting. And standing there, holding Michael's hand, I knew that no amount of manipulation, no act of betrayal, could diminish the bond we had built, the trust we had cultivated, or the love we had chosen to nurture despite the odds. The days after the revelation felt heavy but strangely freeing. Michael and I spent mornings together, quietly tending to our home and garden, afternoons walking through the park, evenings talking late into the night. We didn't need to speak about Daniel and Claire constantly, but we both knew the unspoken truth hung in the air. Their betrayal had been exposed, and now it was up to us how we would handle what came next. I realized quickly that the confrontation had not ended the tension entirely. Daniel and Claire did not disappear from our lives. They were still my children, after all, but there was a new dynamic now. No longer could they subtly manipulate, whisper under their breath, or test Michael in small, cruel ways. We had shifted the balance. The power had changed, and with that, a sense of calm authority settled over me that I hadn't known I possessed. I began setting firm boundaries. Invitations were now on my terms. Visits, phone calls, and even casual interactions had clear expectations. I refused to be guilted or pressured into situations where manipulation could occur. Daniel and Claire, initially resistant, pushed back at first, questioning why the rules had changed, subtly implying I was being overprotective. But with each interaction, I grew more confident. Calmly, patiently, I reminded them their actions had consequences. Respect and honesty were no longer optional. Michael's presence was a constant support. He never spoke over me, never tried to take control, but simply reinforced the strength I had started to claim for myself. His quiet confidence gave me courage. I remember one evening, after a particularly tense phone conversation with Claire, Michael put his hand over mine and said softly, "You are allowed to protect your happiness. You always have been. This time, you just see it clearly." And in that moment, I realized how much power I had gained, not by confrontation, but by clarity and truth. The first major test came during a family gathering, a dinner hosted by a relative who didn't know the full story. Daniel and Claire arrived with their usual polite smiles, but there was tension this time. Their eyes betrayed unease. And for the first time, I noticed how differently Michael and I approached these situations. We were calm, composed, confident. We didn't react to small jabs. We didn't chase arguments, and we didn't give them the satisfaction of control. Our silence and steady presence spoke louder than any confrontation could have. During the dinner, Claire made a subtle remark about Michael's work, something meant to undermine him, to make him feel inadequate in front of others. Michael, as always, responded with quiet dignity, politely explaining his position, while I added my calm support, reinforcing his credibility and gently redirecting the conversation. I could see the shift in the room. Friends and relatives who had been silent witnesses to past tensions now noticed the difference. The mockery, the subtle undermining, it was no longer tolerated, and the quiet strength of our unity was impossible to ignore. I also began rebuilding my own sense of independence. The months of betrayal had taught me to rely not just on Michael, but on myself. I started volunteering at the community center again, reconnecting with old friends, and taking time for myself. I realized that my happiness wasn't contingent solely on Michael's presence. It was something I could cultivate within myself, and his support made it richer, not dependent. Meanwhile, Daniel and Claire's attempts to regain control slowly faltered. Their comments became less frequent, their subtle manipulations less effective. I noticed the frustration in their faces, the awkwardness in their tone. It was a quiet reversal of power, almost imperceptible at first, but unmistakable once you noticed it. And instead of gloating, I simply felt relief and a profound sense of justice. The truth had realigned the balance, and Michael and I were free from the weight of their hidden cruelty. There were difficult moments, of course. Family gatherings still carried tension. Daniel would occasionally slip an pointed comment, Claire, a backhanded compliment, trying to provoke or unsettle. But now, I had learned to observe without reacting. I responded with calm, measured words, with boundaries firmly in place. And Michael, always beside me, never allowed the situation to escalate. His presence reminded me that I was no longer alone in facing this betrayal, that we were a team, and that the manipulations of others could not define our life together. One afternoon, months after the wedding and the revelation, I found myself alone with Daniel. I didn't seek confrontation. but I wanted to speak honestly. I told him quietly, without anger, about the hurt caused, about the breach of trust, and about the importance of respect in any relationship. I could see the shame in his eyes. I didn't demand an apology, but I offered an opportunity for accountability. And surprisingly, he accepted it, not perfectly, not entirely, but sincerely enough that I could feel a shift. However small, toward understanding. Claire, too, eventually approached me, her own admission quieter, more hesitant. She spoke of envy, fear, and insecurity, of not knowing how to process the idea of me finding happiness again. I listened, patient, calm, and empathetic. I didn't excuse the behavior, but I allowed the conversation to be a moment of honesty, a step toward redefining our relationship. The process wasn't instantaneous. Healing is rarely instantaneous. But over time, the sense of betrayal lost its sharp edge. The anger and humiliation that had once weighed so heavily on my chest were replaced by a quiet, resolute strength. Michael and I continued to build our life together, grounded in truth, mutual respect, and the knowledge that we had weathered something deeply painful without losing ourselves or our bond. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that consequences need not be dramatic to be real. The reversal of power didn't come in shouting matches or explosive arguments. It came in steady boundaries, in calm assertiveness, in refusing to allow manipulation to define the terms of our life. The payoff was profound: dignity, peace, and a renewed sense of love that had been tested and proven resilient. Looking back, I can see that the betrayal, though painful, was a turning point. It forced me to recognize the depths of my own strength, to redefine my relationships, and to claim the happiness I had fought for. It also revealed Michael in ways I hadn't fully appreciated: his patience, his support, his unwavering respect. The lessons were harsh, yes, but invaluable. Now, when I think about that wedding, the laughter, the whispers, and the humiliation, I no longer feel anger or shame. I feel gratitude for the clarity, for the truth, and for the opportunity to build a life with someone who honors and respects me fully. Daniel and Claire may have tested me, but in doing so, they revealed not my weakness, but my resilience and the quiet, unwavering strength of the man who stood by my side through it all. One thing became clear: life doesn't always hand you justice in the way you expect. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the form of truth revealed, boundaries respected, and love reaffirmed. And that is the most powerful consequence of all: the knowledge that, despite betrayal, despite manipulation, we can reclaim our life, our dignity, and our joy, and no one can take that away.